The growing tension between the Asian immigrants to the U.S. and the Americans in the late 19th century roused debate on the issue of the most diplomatic approach to the rising problem of immigration to America. In the mid-19th century, people of Asian descent began immigrating to the United States in search of gold. The California Gold Rush had begun. In 1848, the first official record of Chinese immigrants came to America. 700 Chinese came ashore in search of Jinshan, or Gold Mountain. These people came here in search of great riches, but many were met with disappointment. After the gold rush, many Chinese found work on the Transcontinental Railroad. However, after these expenditures, the white settlers immigrating west were less than accommodating. Because of the anti-Chinese Americans, Congress composed a bill to stop Chinese immigration. At first, President Arthur tried to fight the bill, and Congress was unable to override the veto. However, the bill was pushed through, and he signed it on May 6, 1882, ratifying the Chinese Exclusion Act. Stated in the preamble of the Chinese Exclusion Act,
in the opinion of the government of the United States, the coming of Chinese laborers to this country endangers the good order of certain localities.
Expressing the view the government had on the immigrants. This act made it so that Chinese labor immigrants could not enter the U.S. for a 10-year period of time, with reasons being that the immigrants endangered the well-being of certain areas. Certain exceptions were made to the act. One such exception was that, for a period of 90 days after ratification, the Chinese immigrants that were coming into the country were to be allowed to stay. This policy was put in place because of the time that it took to get news across the Pacific. The only Chinese that were able to get into the U.S. after the passage of this act were the Chinese government officials, and even they had to have legal documents certifying that they were indeed government officials. Either that, or they would have to have some kind of proof that they were indeed coming into the country legally. However, there were still many people that didn't meet these requirements. These people were the average Chinese attempting to get into the United States because of the less enjoyable conditions in China. This created an underground market for coaching books to become prevalent. These books were sold to people trying to enter the United States and contained information about people who are already in the U.S. Since one of the exceptions to the Chinese Exclusion Acts was that immediate family members of someone already in the U.S. could enter America, these people became able to enter the U.S. When someone purchased a coaching book, they would memorize all of the information in it, and upon their arrival, they would be interrogated by the U.S. Customs Office. These coaching books were disposed of immediately after memorization to avoid the discovery of such a document. The interrogations these people went through were incredibly grueling and redundant.
水晶露台前立渠，陆路五要入户南，临风道府行足时，阿勒水质筑木牢。
The seascape resembles Lichen, twisting and turning for 1,000 li. There is no shore to land, and it is difficult to walk. With a gentle breeze, I arrived at the city, thinking it would be so. At ease, how was one to know he was to live in a wooden building? On the other hand, there were already many Chinese in America. A large percentage of the Chinese population in America lived in California, many of which had come during the gold rush. Section 5 of the Exclusion Act states that any immigrants that were already in the United States before the passing of the act were eligible to receive a certificate that would allow them to leave the country and come back. American-born Chinese also had this right, but it was important that they could prove that they were indeed citizens of the U.S. The passing of the act was a tough decision for Congress to make. Many people living in the western United States felt that the Chinese laborers were affecting the economy, as the arrival of the laborers coincided with a recession in the United States economy. As president, Chester A. Arthur had to choose what was good for the people, and after much debate and time, he passed the act. The Chinese Exclusion Act was not the only policy directed towards the Chinese, however. The earliest policies, in the 1850s, demanded taxes and other fees of the Chinese laborers immigrating to find work. Some policies extended far after the passage of the act. The foreign miners' license tax required a payment of $3 each month from all foreign miners who were not U.S. citizens, targeting Chinese miners. Other taxes like this targeted specific areas where Chinese workers, or coolies, often took positions. Some acts, like the Q Ordinance, were specifically directed towards the Chinese traditions and culture. The Q was a traditional braid worn by Chinese men as a symbol of their loyalty to China. As many of them planned to return home to China, shaving this off would have been an act of extreme shame. The debate concerning the Chinese was not all political. On the streets of most California towns, Chinese people could not walk through without being ridiculed or insulted. The fear the Americans had of the coolies stealing their income was so real that many even went on riots, burning down the houses of Chinese and driving out anyone who remained. These racist policies put in place by the state of California and the U.S. did not go unchallenged, however. Many of these cases were taken to court, some of them all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. One of these such cases was United States versus Wong Kim Ark. This case had to do with the citizenship of an American man of Chinese descent. Wong Kim was born in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1873. During the Geary Act, an extension of the Chinese Exclusion Act, a man by the name of Wong Kim Ark went to the Supreme Court with his case. The case was that the government denied him entry into the U.S. when he came back from a visit to China in 1895, on the sole grounds that he wasn't a citizen. The peculiar thing was that, in 1894, Wong Kim had left the U.S. and come back. Back then, he had been recognized as a citizen and allowed back into the country. The United States Supreme Court ruled that, as a citizen of the United States,
It is conceded that, if he is a citizen of the United States, the acts of Congress, known as the Chinese Exclusion Acts, prohibiting persons of the Chinese race from coming into the United States, do not and cannot apply to him, Wong Kim Ark.
Wong Kim was allowed back into the U.S., and this became the grounds for the peaceful resolutions of many cases in U.S. history. Another preceding case, similar to that of Wong Kim Ark's in the sense that American-born Chinese are citizens and have rights, is the Tate versus Hurley case of 1885. Mamie Tate was an 8-year-old girl of Chinese parentage. The school board said that according to their policies, they were allowed to keep her from entering the school. Joseph Tate thought this was unconstitutional and proceeded to sue the school principal, taking his case to the Supreme Court of California. The fact of the matter was, Mamie had been born in the U.S. and had always been a U.S. citizen. But regardless of that fact, the school stated that the Chinese were a danger to the well-being of the state. Thus, the principal reasoned that they had no obligation to educate Mamie, let alone any other Chinese child. Contradictorily, the Education Code, Section 1667, states that
Every school, unless otherwise provided by law, must be open for the admission of all children between 6 and 21 years of age residing in the district.
Following this code, the court decided in favor of the Tapes. This case was the foundation for the later and more famous case of Brown versus Board of Education 69 years later in 1954. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 roused much debate in the government of the United States. Asian Americans that came to the United States experienced extreme racial prejudice, and it was nearly impossible to find a diplomatic solution to the issue that would please both parties. A long debate between Congress and the President ensued. The last racist policy was lifted in the year 1965. The United States has never made an official apology to these Chinese or their descendants, and there is still racist criticism of the Chinese today, although much less pronounced.
没有强权不公理，并勿误人也无乎？不要分是 真长苦，负手回袭木劳活。
America has power, but no justice. In prison, we were victimized, as if we were guilty, given no opportunity to explain. It was truly brutal. I bow my head in reflection, but there is nothing I can do.